Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Wellness TV. Today we are going to be going on a virtual grocery store tour. So not a real grocery store tour, but virtual. So the good news about a virtual tour, no crowds. The bad news is no food either, but doesn't matter. We're in this to learn. So I'm going to help you navigate your way through your grocery store, which has changed quite a bit, obviously in recent weeks, but just to help you learn a few tips to save some money, but also put forth the most nutritious meal for you and your family. So without burying the lead, I want to come right out and say, look, grocery stores want to make money. They're in it to make money just like any other retailer that you might frequent. And what we're seeing with grocery stores recently is that they're making quite a bit of money. Anecdotally, the Publix right in our neighborhood says during the peak of the quote unquote panic buying season, our grocery store was basically doubling its sales week over week for about a month compared to the previous year. So what we're seeing overall is more and more people initially were going to a grocery store, but we're seeing that trickle off just a little bit. You look on your screen, this is actually data from cell phone tracking that looks at foot traffic among supermarkets across the country. And you can see pretty even year over year for a while there. Then right around the middle of March, traffic really started to peak and then declined quite a bit once the safe at home measures were implemented, across different regions of the country. But basically, long story short, grocery stores want you to make money. So in order to help save you money and also maximize nutrition, there's some things that you should be aware of. First, supermarkets are designed to engage all of your senses. As soon as you walk in to a supermarket, you could see the produce department, you could see the floral department, maybe you smell the bakery. I know in my grocery store, I can smell the fried chicken from the parking lot, and all these things get us excited about going into the store and can induce us to spend just a little bit more money because our senses are fully engaged. And that's why we notice some of those extra purchases that we would not make if we were doing exclusively online shopping. That's something you may have noticed if you've switched from in-person to online shopping recently, just to limit your trips away from home. Now, how the supermarket is engineered is designed to help you spend more time in there. So pharmacies have been inserted into supermarkets to help increase the time spent while in the supermarket. The carts are a little bit bigger to help you put more food into them. You'll see strategic placement of combination items like s'mores displays and spaghetti and marinara sauce displays, all these things packaged together to put the thought in your mind that, hey, maybe you need this. And that's, again, how they're able to generate some additional revenue that maybe wasn't going to be the case when you first set foot into the store. Supermarkets also charge premium slotting fees for certain areas of their placement in terms of the interior of the store. So those higher profit items, you'll typically see them at eye level in most cases, with the exception of the cereal aisle. Incidentally, those higher profit items are not at eye level. They're at the eye level of a child. So again, they're appealing to a younger market with that particular section of the grocery store. An interesting observation that you can maybe see for yourself next time you're at a Publix or a Winn-Dixie or wherever you might be doing your grocery shopping. So again, these are things that supermarkets do to help make the expenditure process a little bit more optimal for them, get you to throw a few more items in that cart. It's changed quite a bit, again, so we used to go to the supermarket, it used to be big visual display, appealing to all the senses. You even had taste testing of some places, but I think a lot of that is going to change moving forward, because when we go to a store now, chances are we may not find everything that we might need, or we're wearing a mask and there's limitations on how much hands-on there can be for sampling and so forth. So I think the business model in supermarkets are going to change quite a bit moving forward, and I'm interested to see how it is going to all unfold. But getting back to the task at hand, helping you help yourself, the best tool that you can have, and we talked about this when we looked at trying to save money in the kitchen in our Waste Less Kitchen episode, is developing that shopping list. That grocery list is going to be your playbook as you enter the store. If you can stick to your list built from your menu, you're going to save more money, obviously, because you're not buying extra items that weren't already on your list. It's also helpful to learn your store layout. So again, if you can minimize your time in the grocery store, that's a less opportunity to spend additional money. It's well known that we probably shouldn't eat on an empty stomach. So if you can have a snack beforehand, if you can go alone to minimize some of the distractions, that's helpful. We've also realized that when looking at prices, it's very helpful to keep a price notebook, meaning what do you typically pay for eggs, orange juice, apples, raspberries, some of your staple items, because oftentimes you'll see food advertised as a blanket price and you might think, well, that's a sale item. But if you look back and realize, oh, these apples for $2.79 a pound, that's not really any different than what they normally are. They just have them advertised that way. So it's helpful to keep a price notebook to see exactly what you typically pay. Now, again, there have been some supply issues, so some of these prices for things such as meat have changed quite a bit, but it's always good to help you understand whether or not an advertised special is truly much different than what you might normally pay for a food product. Of course, it's also helpful to be brand variable for some of your staple items like orange juice and tomato sauce and things that really don't vary too much in overall quality from one brand to the next. And of course, store brands can also be a good tool to save some additional money too. But the other thing that needs to be pointed out here is always look at the price per unit too. If we're looking at a way to save money and you're comparing containers of different sizes, you might be spending a little bit more money for the smaller container, and you wouldn't know that unless you looked at the price per unit. So the price per ounce or whatever type of unit they've established here, that's a very helpful tool to really stretch that food dollar. So keep that in mind next time you're at the grocery store. So we look at grocery store in general from a nutrition perspective. So myself as a dietitian, that's one thing that I try to focus my purchases on. I'm always looking at the nutrition, and the food label can be a helpful tool, but it also can be kind of frustrating too. So always ask yourself when you're looking at the back of a food label, say, how much do I actually plan to eat? Because all the other numbers you see on there, the calories, the fat, the carbs, the protein, the vitamins, are all based on that specific serving size. Doesn't mean that that's the serving size you have to have, but everything that you're going to be consuming is going to be based on that individual serving. There have been some subtle changes to the food label you may have noticed recently. The calories are printed a little bit in a larger font. The serving sizes have been updated a little bit to reflect what most people might actually select for an actual serving. You know, used to see ice cream was like a half a cup serving. That's ridiculous. That's like the size of half a light bulb. You can eat that in one bite. So some of these serving sizes have thankfully been adjusted a little bit to reflect what's a little bit more realistic. And we've also removed some of the vitamins and minerals that really aren't a big concern anymore. You used to see vitamin A and vitamin C listed on the nutrition facts label in terms of what percent a food item might contribute to that nutrient. Those really are no longer nutrients of concern. They've been replaced by vitamin D and potassium, which we're still trying to make sure people are getting adequate amounts into their diet. Generally speaking, the two target nutrients that most people should try to limit would be the added sugar and the added salt. The American Heart Association suggests that we try to keep our added sugar intake to about 6 to 9 teaspoons a day, with women at the lower end of that spectrum. And then as far as sodium, that daily value is established at 2,300 milligrams a day. So again, those exact numbers could be difficult to remember. That's where that percent daily value is very helpful. So for the example on your screen, it's 160 milligrams, which when you look at it, it's like, well, is that high? Is that low? I don't remember what the number is supposed to be. That's where that percent daily value can be very helpful to kind of put that number in perspective. But always look at the food label based on what's important to you. Maybe you're just watching total calories and that's what's important to you. Or maybe you're concerned about carbohydrate because of blood sugar concerns and that's what's important to you. There's so much information on there. If you try to evaluate every single aspect of it for things that may not be as important for you, it can make that process a little bit more frustrating. So always put that in perspective. What's going to matter most to you and what are you going to plan on eating? And remember, just like with grocery stores, food manufacturers want you to spend money too. And you're up against a pretty big monster when we look at just how much resources are devoted to advertising of food and beverages as well as restaurants compared to what's slotted for chronic disease and health promotion, chronic disease prevention. So you look on your screen, 13.4 billion estimated that was spent in 2017 for advertising compared to 1.2 billion for chronic disease prevention and health promotion. So again, there are a lot of resources in play to induce you to make purchases, but only you are the one responsible for determining what's going to be best for you. We go into a store now and there's all types of health claims. It's whole grain, it's real fruit, it supports the immune system, non-GMO verified, made with real honey, all the things that you see on your screen. The other word for that is just marketing. That's all these terms are. These are just marketing terms. Only you can be responsible for making the right choice for you, not a grocery store company, not a food company, but you yourself know what's going to be most important for you and your family. So when you look at food products, no matter what it is, try to ignore all the stuff on the front of the package. Try to just look at the nutrition facts, try to look at the ingredients, and of course, price. Those are what's going to matter most of all, because that's the most objective part of that food choice. Don't get swayed by the marketing terms, because you might end up making a purchase that could not be in the best interest or may not be in the best interest of you and your family. Now, when we look at food labels, you can get lost in comparisons, because you might find two products that are fairly similar, but you're unsure, like, oh, which is the better choice? So the first rule of comparing food products, so you're trying to decide which product is most nutritious, looking at the nutrition facts, I try to have people just make sure you're dealing with the same amount to begin with. Are you comparing similar quantities? So the example on your screen happens to compare two different types of turkey breast, or two different brands of turkey breast. One serving size listed at 3 slices. The other serving size is 2 ounces. So I have to ask myself, is that the same amount? Slices versus ounces, how big is a slice? So that's where oftentimes the metric conversion of that, which you'll see in parentheses at 57 grams and 56 grams on the example, tells me that, okay, this is pretty much the same amount of turkey. All right, so we are comparing ounce per ounce. We're making a similar comparison. So I see they both have the same amount of calories. So if I'm looking at this, trying to decide, okay, which is the healthier choice? Well, I have to ask myself, okay, well, let's look at sodium. Let's look at the other components of this. So we know that they're both made with turkey. Obviously, it's turkey breast. The first ingredient is going to be turkey. But the one on the right has substantially less sodium than the one on the left. And the other interesting thing is the one on the right also has more protein, which tells me that there's a lot more turkey in this product compared to broth and other additives. So to me, ounce per ounce, the choice on the right appears to be more nutritious, and obviously has less added salt too. So again, would not know if that's a fair comparison though until I'm looking at the actual quantities of food. That's where I know for sure that, okay, this is something that I can make an equal comparison to. If we look at other claims that are thrown out there, again, don't be swayed by the front of the package claims. Here I've got 2 different types of potato chips. You got regular potato chips and you got 40% reduced fat potato chips. So when I look at that right off the bat, I say to myself, oh, the one on the right might be a much better choice for me because it's 40% less fat. But what you may not realize until you look closely at the numbers, that those differences, which in your head, 40% sounds significant, may not be much different once you start to look at the numbers. So if we look at this particular product, the regular potato chip, 220 calories, the reduced 200 calories. So only a 20 calorie difference. They're made with the same stuff, okay, but just different amounts of carbohydrate have been added to the overall recipe or the quantity of what's being used. So a little bit more potato, a little less canola oil for the reduced, and then vice versa. So the difference really aren't that significant. And it's important to point that out because I don't know about you, sometimes when I see reduced fat or lower calorie before I start to pay attention to these types of items, you think, oh, well, I can just eat the whole bag because I'm saving 40%. But in fact, it's just about a 10% calorie difference overall. So don't be fooled by some of these claims. Instead, focus on the facts. Which brings us to one of my favorite products to look at, because this is well littered with all types of different marketing claims. You know, we've got Welch's fruit snacks. All right, so on the front of this package, I see a claim here. Fruit is our first ingredient. Well, fantastic. I mean, it's a fruit snack. I hope fruit is the first ingredient. You also see it's now made with real fruit. I'm not sure what other type of fruit there is, but I'm glad that they're using real fruit, not plastic fruit. You'll also see that it has 100% of vitamin C, 25% of vitamin A, vitamin E. It's fat-free, it's gluten-free, no preservatives, good for the rainforest, whatever it is. These are all marketing claims. And again, what I want to ask myself, okay, what's behind the package? What am I actually eating here? With all of these marketing claims, when you see them in this great a concentration, that should throw up some red flags, because that means that they're probably trying to hide something. For this particular example, what they're really trying to hide from you is that fruit is not the first real ingredient. The first ingredient is actually fruit juice, which is much different from a physiological standpoint in our bodies and nutritionally in our bodies when we compare it to just whole fruit. The next two ingredients, corn syrup and sugar, we all know about those. Modified cornstarch, another type of additive, a sweetener. So it's not till we get to the 1, 2, 3, fourth ingredient that we really get any kind of real fruit purees. So if I look at this product and I tell myself, this probably isn't going to be the most nutritious food choice overall, I'd want to see if there's another option similar to it that doesn't have quite as much added sugar and instead has more whole fruit. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get more whole fruit into our diets and less added sugar. So keep that in mind when you're trying to make some evaluations. But again, don't be swayed by some of the clever marketing claims, because they're there just to help themselves sell product. So if we look at it aisle by aisle over some common areas, it's important to try to give you some general tips when you go to different sections of the grocery store. So I've picked a few areas of the grocery store that I think needs a little bit more attention, again, to help you next time you're going out there, starting with canned foods. A lot of people stocked up on canned foods in the pandemic. And when we look at canned foods, remember the canning process, like we talked about in one of our other webinars, really doesn't require many preservatives, if any at all. Just the sealing of that can, heat treatments, enough to help make that product last indefinitely. Salt is often added primarily just for flavoring and maybe to help add a little bit of rigidity to the vegetables or what have you. So check for lower sodium versions of those canned vegetables when you're buying canned fruit or fruit in the container, shelf-stable container. Try to look for it canned in its own juice or water as a way to save some additional calories, save some additional added sugar, and then in the case of vegetables, added sodium. Still can be nutritious selections in the diet and can save you a lot of money, because you're usually minimizing waste when you're using these types of products as part of your meal planning. Same with frozen fruits and vegetables. A good way to save money, just as nutritious as fresh. And in fact, just based on handling procedures, sometimes your frozen vegetables and your frozen fruits can be even more nutrient dense than their fresh counterparts. But just like with the canned stuff, you want to check for added sugars and added salt. Try to limit the cream and the cheese sauce varieties, because those, of course, are going to bring with it extra salt and extra fat. So again, thing to keep in mind when we're shopping in that particular area of the grocery store. But again, a good way to save some money, stretch that food dollar without sacrificing anything with regards to nutrition. The one area of the supermarket that you can spend a lot of time looking at different products is your cereal aisle. There's tons of choices out there. Remember, this is the one section of the supermarket where the highest profit items are actually placed a little bit below your eye level and more at a child's eye level. So the 4-step process I typically try to suggest when evaluating breakfast cereals, try to look beyond the first ingredients, see what it's made of. I don't have a general rule of thumb of what are the first 3 or 4 or 5 most important ingredients, but just look beyond what's the first one, see what else is in there. Try to limit the added sugars. So if we look at what's suggested over the course of the day, anywhere from 25 to 36 grams per day of added sugar, I think it's fair to try to keep your breakfast cereal to about 8 of those grams. So it's a good chunk of that 25 to 36 each day. So keep that in mind when we're looking at the added sugars. I try to look at comparisons of cereals you're willing to eat or your family's willing to eat and try to make the best choice that way. Try to choose based on which one has the least amount of added sugar and the most amount of fiber. And look at those two things. If we look at fiber, if we're looking at a product that has a whole grain as the first ingredient, which this one actually does, whole grain corn, that's typically going to denote a slightly higher amount of fiber, which is actually good for us. But what we don't know is how these fiber additives help us. In other words, this product, in addition to the corn, it also has inulin and oat fiber and pea fiber, which are not unhealthy or not least nutritious or not harmful, but we don't know if it has the same overall health benefits as fiber from whole foods. So oftentimes you'll see breakfast cereals with a tremendous amount of fiber added to them in those types of additives, and we're not sure if that's actually has the same overall health benefits from a high fiber diet that's built on just regular whole grains, beans, fruits, and vegetables. So just getting fiber for fiber's sake in the form of inulin and pea fiber and oat fiber may not be the best overall choice. Try to get it in whole food form whenever possible. And just like anything else, when we're evaluating breakfast cereals, what's your serving size? Is it 3/4 cup? Is it 1 cup? What are they actually using in their example? Is that what you're willing to eat? Is their serving size 3/4 cup and your serving size is a punch bowl? Well, if that's the case, then we have to adjust, obviously, some of those numbers. Now, digging a little bit deeper, going into the dairy case, the general recommendation in terms of healthy eating guidelines is when you're choosing dairy, if you tolerate dairy and if you want to include it as part of your diet, there's no reason why it can't be a nutritious inclusion of your diet, but don't get too hung up on the low fat versus the non-fat. There are very small differences between the two. It's just important to try to choose lower fat versions whenever they're available. But if you compare them very carefully, you'll notice some surprising differences. So on your screen here, you see non-fat yogurt versus low-fat yogurt, two different brands being shown there. If I look at the back of them, the non-fat actually has more calories than the low-fat, and the non-fat actually is a smaller container because it's got a 150-gram container versus a 170-gram container. So again, not a huge difference, but ounce per ounce, the low-fat version of this particular brand anyway is a lower calorie option than the non-fat version, which looks to have a considerable amount of added sugar. So sugar is the third ingredient here. So you can see the difference, 14 grams of sugars, which would include the sugar that occurs naturally in non-fat milk versus 9 grams of sugar in this particular product. Now, again, when we look at revised and modified food labels, you now see added sugars as part of that equation. So when we look at added sugars, those numbers per day that I threw out there, the 25 to 36 grams, remember, that's just referring to added sugar, not the natural sugars that you find in milk and fruits and vegetables and so forth. Another area of the supermarket that you want to pay very close attention to, not so much because of any individual differences, but just know that cheese, although a good source of calcium, good source of protein, and pretty awesome flavor, is also one of the higher calorie food choices in your grocery cart. You can find some lower calorie cheeses, Swiss cheese, feta cheese. You can look carefully at the food labels and see, okay, which choice is something you want to try and see how many calories you save. But overall, they're about anywhere from 80 to 120 calories per ounce. So a 1 ounce serving of cheese is basically just one large slice of cheese or a couple of cheese cubes. So it can add up pretty quickly. So just be mindful of that when you're including it as part of your grocery list in terms of the total amount of calories. It does tend to run high on the sodium side. So if you're somebody with elevated blood pressure, it's a good reason to try to be very conservative with how much you include in your overall diet. Another big area of confusion sometimes is going to be the chicken area. So we tend to eat more chicken than any other meat compared to beef and pork and lamb and game meats. We love chicken. We're eating more chicken than anything else. If we look at what the standard bearer for nutrition is for chicken, it's always that skinless chicken breast, which to me is probably one of the more boring components of a meal because it's very limited in how you can prepare it. It can dry out very easily. So I think that chicken thighs need a little bit more love, a little bit more attention. And if you look at the difference in calories between the two, it's not substantial. 130 calories versus 160. And again, well, John, what about the portion size difference? We're looking at the same amount, 4 ounces, 112 grams versus 4 ounces, 112 grams. So again, 30 extra calories, maybe a better flavor profile, maybe a little bit more flexibility if you're looking at it as part of a crock pot or Instant Pot type of recipe. Don't be dissuaded by using chicken thighs whenever you'd like. Again, the overall preparation is what's going to matter most of all. Doesn't matter if you're selecting split chicken breasts that are very lean if you're deep fat frying them. Okay, so if you want to try to save overall calories, the preparation method is going to be very important as well. But overall, not a substantial calorie difference when we look at the types of chicken presented right here. Beef, a little bit different. There are, of course, lean selections of beef available, but there are also very high-fat selections of beef out there. Typically, the more well-marbled it is, which is the case for this ribeye steak here, the overall greater amounts of fat that it has. But it can be a significant difference when we compare the high-fat cuts of meat versus the leaner cuts of meat. For this particular example, so ribeye steak, again, not going to be on anyone's low-calorie or lean meat list. It's 300 calories for a 3-ounce portion compared to the sirloin, which is a 4-ounce portion at 210 calories. So not even, it's more meat and still less overall calories. And general rule of thumb for all of your meat selections, pork included, your loin and your round cuts are typically going to be the leanest out there. But again, just like anything else, the portion size is going to matter most of all. So if you're selecting a cut of meat that's no larger than 4 ounces, I wouldn't get too concerned over the ribeye, sirloin, this, that, the other. Just purchase whatever you think is going to be most flavorful for your family. But again, if you're going for those higher fat cuts of meat like the ribeyes and such, you have to be very careful with that portion size because those calories can add up pretty quickly. But again, remember, okay, yes, choosing lean is going to be a great idea overall from a nutrition standpoint, but don't forget to pay close attention to that portion size too. And I would look at it for the next couple of months anyway, so this is mid-May, probably through July is what the forecast is for these higher overall meat prices. What we know is that demand is up. I think the estimate I saw was demand is up about 40% because we're not dining out as often as we used to with the pandemic, and supplies are down. So here you see a chart from the Wall Street Journal that shows just the production change from the previous year when we look at chicken, beef, and pork. So they're down substantially. So it's been forecasted that it might be July before those prices start to bounce back, if they do at all. But again, remember, when we look at the components of a healthy diet, overall in this country, meat takes on a very big chunk of our plate, but it doesn't have to. 3 to 4 ounces is more than reasonable for most adults when we look at an adequate portion for lunch and for dinner. And again, another good reason to consider some plant-based protein choices when we look at menu planning moving forward. So don't be too dissuaded by the prices. This might be a good time to reevaluate your menu and see where you can expand your selections to other areas as well. So we're going to finish up by looking at bread products. Now, bread overall, of course, is an important staple of our diets, but what I want people to understand more than anything is the type of grain that's being used is what's going to matter most of all. And this is where we try to have people choose whole grains. But that's kind of a confusing term because that's part of the marketing lingo that's often provided on the front of the package, made with 10 grams of whole grains or 15 grams of whole grains. What you want to ask yourself is just look at the ingredient list. If the word whole is in that first grain that's listed, that's a good start. This particular example, we look at first ingredient, stone ground whole wheat. Fantastic. If you see enriched or unbleached, that's going to tell you that that's a refined grain. So something like a white bread, and that's not going to be the most nutritious choice. We want that dietary fiber that's going to help slow down that increase in blood glucose that could occur after we consume bread products. So if I have a whole grain, it's going to slow down that increase in my blood sugar. So that's a good thing. And because it contains fiber, it's going to fill us up sooner, so we're less likely to overeat. So that's what I typically recommend when we look at what to select for bread products. You look at multigrain, you look at locally sourced, organic, again, these are all marketing terms. Just look at the facts. what's the first ingredient. And then if you're unclear as you make your comparisons from one type of bread to the next, look at the fiber. Okay, I think a good source of fiber, at least for a slice of bread, so a 1 ounce slice of bread, which is about 28 grams, 2 to 3 grams per slice. That's fantastic. That's a good choice when we talk in terms of overall nutrition. So, looking at the grocery store, trying to outsmart the grocery store, the most important tool that you have at your disposal is that list. You stick to that list, that's going to help you save some money. It's going to limit those extra purchases and keep you on a good track to preserve your pocketbook as well as your waistline when we look at trying to be smart about our calorie intake too. We talked about the healthy eating plate at previous talks, just showing you once again what are some guidelines in terms of the types of foods to select, your whole grains, what are some examples of those, your healthier proteins. Typically, I suggest the less legs, the better when we look at protein, so fish, poultry, beans, and nuts, and then try to limit our overall red meat consumption when possible, including healthy fats with your meals, and then again, trying to make sure the balance of your meals is coming primarily from plant foods, all things being equal, okay? So, in order to get credit for this particular activity, just like before, all we need is your name and badge number. Send that to wellness@jax.ufl.edu. Put grocery store tour in that subject line, and we'll get you 10 points towards your wellness credit. Keep in mind that the current platform that we're using will not go back up until July 1st, but trust us, you'll see these points in that new platform when it does reopen. We're going to continue to put content out there for you to help you, help your family. But if there's ideas that you have for other topics that you'd like to see us talk about or explore or present or questions you want answered, feel free to email us using that email address. Or if you want to talk specifically about nutrition as it relates to you and your family, I can accommodate you via Zoom. We can also do it in our classroom. So if you want to come in person but still maintain some distancing, we can do that as well. You see my email address there on the screen as well as my telephone number. So again, we'd love to help you, and we look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Thank you.